Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Fake Accents Unite. We're on episode 135 now. I'm joined, of course, by my co-host, the Britisher. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. How are we doing?
Not too bad. A bit of a rough morning
Somewhat
after
of a
the
hangover,
weekend.
I would suspect.
Just a dash for those of you who've been following on Twitter. A deeply misleading video of me doing shots has been circulating over the airwaves. We're also joined this evening by Alexander Adams. Good evening, sir.
Good evening to both of you and to your listeners.
Alexander is a writer, art critic, an artist in his own right. Would you say as well? Or
yes. Well,
you know.
Well, no, I would. Well, I hope not. The British establishment would rather that was behind them, but no, I still got something of an audience, and even if it's not through British public spaces.
Well, good to hear. Alex is also the writer of several books. I'm going to post a link, actually, to one of them, which is called Culture War: Art, Identity Politics, and Cultural Entryism, which you can pick up on via Amazon or elsewhere, any reputable retailer outside of that. And it's definitely worth a read. It talks at great length about the canon of art, which is sort of like the generally informally agreed sort of list of great works and artists, and that which is remembered, and how things have intersected with all sorts of political movements, from feminism to modern to more modern groups, as it were. Is that a fair estimation, would you say?
Yes, it is. There's a number of... So Culture War is one of the two books. The other book is Iconoclasm. Culture War covers a number of areas. So one of them is the canon, as you mentioned. There's also another one on Islamism and free speech, the repatriation of artwork to former colonies. Then there's one on feminism. And then there's something else which kind of ties everything together in a theory that I call cultural entryism.
There we go.
Oh, thanks for the kind comments from Maven, who I met at the event, one of the organisers of the great event.
Yes. So for those of people who aren't aware, I'm British. I don't know if you've been keeping up with this, but Alexander and myself were at the inaugural Shieldings conference this weekend. You aware of that?
I can only say that I was aware of it happening. And then I got confirmation of it by seeing you get drunk.
I wasn't drunk. I had a modest amount of vodka and other beverages that evening, and it was over a longer period of time, and we were up till 3 or 4 in the morning each night. So talking, I would add, about these things long after the bar had closed. So
I can't exactly confirm that, because I was the sort of person who retired to my room at 11 o'clock in the evening, but I believe there was some alcohol involved at some stage. Yes,
indeed. So I hope that I've given a decent introduction to Alex. A little while ago, Britisher, you and I did a little stream which was gently entitled the Art Coombe stream afterwards, by people who had been listening, where we kind of went over various bits of art through history that we consider to be.
Oh, was this when we sort of touched on Bernini and
yes,
things like that? Yeah,
and lots of things that we
Apollo
enjoyed.
and Daphne, that sort of thing.
Yes, we were obsessing, Alexander, over this. The idea of sculpture in particular, and especially the flesh from the stone, which seems to be somewhat of a lost art form at the moment, with the grand list of monstrosities going up. Fire stations, as we saw at the weekend, made entirely out of sweeping, broad, smooth slabs of concrete.
Which apparently was not functional as a fire station, and had to be converted into an art gallery.
Indeed.
Come again? Sorry, what?
So there was a fire station. In fact, I'll try and get it Fire station converted.
So this was a talk by an architect, Edward Slingsby, and he was talking about a contemporary art gallery by the first building by Zaha Hadid that was built because these contemporary architects are famous for designing lots of buildings and many of them not getting built. But her first one was a fire station that was indeed made out of sort of sweeping curves and parabolas and so forth. And he showed us a picture of it, and he told us that because people hated it, the firemen didn't like it. It wasn't very functional, so they had to convert it into something else.
Here it is. I'm just sharing this particular screen. As you can see, it is a great sort of grim building. It's not exactly welcoming, is it?
Yeah, it looks sort of like some strange thing that has partly sunken into the ground, and for some reason one has given it one fin.
And it also, I mean, like, these are incredibly flattering images of it. Like, it's clearly.
Yeah,
like,
I would like to see it sort of in the rain with overcast skies, and when it's damp. That would more than likely give a sort of a more a fairer representation of whatever monstrosity has been built there. So this was supposed to be a fire station, and then it was made into an art gallery because it was of no use to as a fire station.
So they tried to fit a fire engine in it, and it didn't fit. Yes.
Yes, that was the response of the audience as well. It was a very good talk. Yes.
So basically, it couldn't even accommodate. Basically, it couldn't even fulfill the most basic function of a fire station, which is to accommodate a fire engine.
Correct.
Yes. Correct.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, some compromises must be made in the name of art.
Well, yes, I did also visit an art gallery, something that was actually designed as an art gallery by her in Denmark, and it was a very interesting shape. Unfortunately, it was a shape that wasn't sort of at right angles or perpendicular or whatever to the ground. So you had lots of odd angles inside, which you couldn't use because pictures like to hang on vertical walls.
Space. Yeah.
Yes, got lots of dead space. So it wasn't ideal. It did look quite nice from the outside, but it was not very practical.
Well, I mean, when it comes to sort of the vanity of architects, I remember there was that, I don't know in what conversation I just recently mentioned this. When it came to the Labour Party coming in at the beginning of its term with Blair, for 2 or 3 years or so, they seemed quite sensible. So, for example, one of the first things they did was to announce a scheme whereby they would repair schools, because something like 1/3 of all schools by that time had to abandon parts of their buildings because the weather was coming in. So you felt, okay, yes, something urgently needs to be done here. The government has been somewhat remiss. So they spent lots of money repairing these schools. And then they came up with the idea of, why don't we knock all those schools down and then build academies instead? So we got all these monstrous new builds all across the country. And I think is it the Audit Commission? Is that the name of it? I'm not sure. They looked at the value for money we were getting out of these buildings. And they pointed out that invariably almost every one of these schools was in fact a sort of vanity project for an architect, which therefore meant that it had a gargantuan atrium that, possibly reached up the whole height of the building. So again, just as you mentioned, complete dead space that is of absolutely no use to anybody. And, similar things were then also done with hospitals. That, all these new hospitals that were being built that ended up having fewer beds in them than the actual old hospitals.
Yes, Owain is making some very good points in the chat. Obviously, he's an architecture expert, and I do agree with you, British. There was a lot of vanity. I mean, architects are known as complete megalomaniacs and incredibly vain. So, and a lot of their work reflects that.
Megalomaniacs. So would you say that, for example, a vain megalomaniac would be someone who's a Welshman who is dreaming of empires of old during the Bronze Age? Owain, I will not forget this.
Was that an Owain thing? I missed that.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Oh, I see.
Indeed. Oh yes.
I wasn't sure if you were talking about him or about AA. So the other AA, the fake AA. I'm the real AA.
The Faye? I don't know what we call him.
No, Owain has his theory that in sort of Bronze Age times there would have been a massive empire, or at least there could have been. So therefore there must have been a gargantuan Welsh empire. That was kind of Atlantis.
I mean, literally Atlantis.
Yes, and let's put it like this: I somewhat disagree with him there.
I'm sure Owain didn't propose anything as ludicrous as that. I'm sure you're caricaturing it.
Oh, not so obvious. Am I caricaturing this?
Well, Britisher, you are literally the embodiment of a caricature of yourself.
Well, there is that, yes.
But you also... I've never been known to caricature anything ever in the entirety of your YouTube career. So
of course, no, never.
Possibly all of the caricature.
But Owain knows, and this is terribly unfair, but yes, Owain knows that there's more than a kernel of truth in what I'm saying here. But let's not go over the same ground again. Sorry, I just couldn't resist. Oh, here he is. Hello.
Hello. Okay. Hello, Owain.
Yes. Is Britisher questioning my my theory once more?
You're great. Well, the theory doesn't exist because obviously what I was talking about was a mere caricature of a well thought out historical theory.
Yeah. Yes. Of course. Of course. I will write my thesis, and you'll be the first to get it, Britisher.
Oh, I can't wait.
But the theory itself. It's not a Welsh empire. I have, it is a British empire. Well, it's going to take too long. I'll take too much of the stream to go through the theory.
That for which we really have little evidence, but which
the theory existed. The theory that's possibly Atlantis comes from the idea that maybe because of the copper mines, say in like the Great Orme at the time in the Bronze Age, which were the largest in Northern Europe, that there must have been trade with the Mediterranean, and thus maybe the kind of the kingdoms of Egypt down that way. And the theory of Atlantis came to Plato through an Egyptian trader, and the only ones to survive the Bronze Age collapse were the Egyptians. So it was possible that could have come down, and the Atlanteans, Atlantis, the people of the Atlantic, who were thus named by Plato, could have been this trading civilization in northern Britain.
Alexander, from what you've heard so far, do you think that mine was really truly a cruel caricature of his proposal?
It does seem to be a fairly clear reflection of what Owain is proposing.
Yes. Thank you. Moving on.
So when it comes to Atlantic art, Atlantic art, no. But I was curious, and I want people to be able to interject and that sort of thing. But obviously, I'm quite familiar with you, Owain, and you, Britisher. We've talked a lot about art, and your talk at the weekend, Alex, was sort of about preserving and building collections of art so that they essentially escape the arms of the ever more censorious state. And I was curious, if you could only save one particular piece of art straight now, like what kind of period would it be from? Do you have a particular piece in mind? Sort of what's your kind of staple? Where in the canon do you consider is like that bit which just tipples you?
Well, you haven't placed me in a tricky position at all by asking me to rescue one item of a huge field.
That is rather cruel. Everything else must be condemned to the flames, but this.
I would have to choose one of my own pictures, of course.
To to guide the
I
new
can detect a
generation.
certain rationale there.
Well, I mean, after I'm gone, if people want to model themselves on my art, then they're quite welcome to. I did. Well, that's kind of tricky because you've kind of tied it into sort of having a national school, and I'm not sure I could pick a masterwork from a national school. I would say maybe Death and the Old Man by Joseph Wright of Derby is a fantastic picture. It shows Death coming as a skeleton approaching an old man who's standing, who's sort of crouched in a landscape. So that's a fantastic picture. It's sort of an embodiment of Enlightenment art, and also of the Italian influence in British art, but also in a good way, I think.
I'm not familiar with that picture, but he was fabulous with light, wasn't he?
That's
Joseph
him. Yeah.
Wright
So
of Derby.
he was famous for doing scenes of ironworks and sort of, yes, that's it. So there are two versions. I think that's either version would be what you want. So yes, it's the yeah. So there's that one, and there's there's two versions like that. And you see how a skeleton is holding the arrow of death, and he casts no shadow.
That's a bit morbid, really, isn't it?
A little bit, but it was just the first thing that sprang to mind.
It's like I believe throughout like our series on the Foundations, Pharaoh has brought up some very morbid sort of kind of, I guess, Enlightenment impressions upon kind of medieval modes of thinking about death and life, because obviously in the Dark Age and the medieval ages, when death's all around you, they had a very they had a very personal relationship with death, and this shows in the works. And you had in the Enlightenment, then you had the kind of them attempting to impress upon it
Yes.
their own vision, and so it's like, so you get all these interesting. I'm trying to remember the painter who paints kind of hell. He does like purgatory and limbo and stuff like that.
Are you thinking of John Martin?
Possibly, and it's
no, you're thinking of Botticelli, aren't you?
Yes, yeah, but
he did the illustrations for Dante.
Yeah, and there's quite gruesome illustrations, and seeing like by some of these artists, and I find it just quite impressive, just the kind of the action they can depict in a scene,
Yeah, I think you talked about this on a stream with
AA. Yeah, so it was it's excellent. So yeah, I just thought I'd lend that. So it's the kind of that period of the Enlightenment in the early kind of before the industrial period, where there's this kind of high religious art, you would say, high Christian art, maybe.
Yeah,
and it's definitely a great period in that sort of stuff. Then you get, for me, my favorite art is landscape as an architect. Always has. I love the kind of more mid-Victorian, late Victorian sort of pieces. So obviously Turner and all that. So if I was to say,
you got any particular one, anything particular that you have to mind that will, evoke that I can put up for people?
There's
I know what it is.
Turner does
XP top screen. There we go. That's the landscape that you're talking about.
Beautiful landscape art.
Landscape.
Mm-hmm. That's a piece of absolute great. Put a Welsh dragon on that, and you got it. It works.
Apparently, that's a real place that has not been photoshopped. It's not been altered. That's an actual photograph of a field in California, I believe.
Really?
Yeah, apparently so.
Must be a golf green.
Amazing.
Like,
I mean, it's probably the most recognizable little hillock,
It's beautiful.
that ever there was.
Apparently, they did all sorts of they did sort of algorithmic tests to see what the most satisfying curving line is, and they measured the percentages of this and that, and they had a variety of clouds and stuff. But that's not actually photoshopped. It's actually a photograph that was taken, and this was the best of the series.
Amazing. A little bit, you know how it is when things. Isn't it amazing? You have like a great master of a particular style or a particular art, and you think about all the little things which must go through their mind when they're about to draw a line or when they're about to paint something. And then but as soon as it gets phrased in technical language, like, we knew that this particular curve was the most evocative to the human spirit, then it becomes it sounds almost macabre, doesn't it? It's soulless in a way, but which is not to say that it didn't serve the desired effect, I suppose.
Well, this talk of art and what art would you save also begs the question. I don't know. I mean, I'm not asking not so obvious, because the question is invariably going to be no. But are either of the two of you familiar with the film The Monuments Men?
Yes.
Indirectly, I've read a couple of books on the subject.
I watched a documentary on the real life Monuments Men. Well,
so there was a Hollywood film made with various actors in it to kind of illustrate what actually happened. Now, obviously, this was somewhat more hyperbolic in order to have drama in it or whatever. But there, of course, you then get that question, which sort of it happens somewhere sort of in mid through the film, but then it plays through all the way to the end, and that is that the character that was played by Hugh Bonneville, he basically dies trying to defend the Bruges Madonna from being taken away by the Nazis. And at the end of the film, you've got sort of the president looking at the George Clooney character saying, was it worth it? Was it worth a man losing his life over this? And that is that sort of question when it comes to, these sort of foundational things in art and culture and whatever. At what point is it just a pretty picture or a pretty figure? And at what point does it become more than that? And that it's pretty much the civilization you are prepared to die for?
Yes.
Well, anyway, that's just me thinking out loud anyway. So, yes, consider it a rhetorical question.
I suppose there's something to be said for the lens of the rose-tinted spectacle, shall we say, of kind of looking back. So a lot of what we see and we've retained is considered valuable because it has stood the test of time, so to speak. So then people are curious about it. We don't really think about, but we're all at the same time we're kind of amazed at some, especially in the art world. You think about how many artists died penniless and then were discovered later on. Much unfortunately for themselves. But and that sort of made its way into the canon and been preserved sort of going forward. But I suppose it's when a particular style, comes to dominate, like the thought. It's something ethereal, but it is influencing the thought. These great painters who influenced all of the other painters in some small way, be it whether or not they wanted to be distinct from that style, or whether or not they wanted to embrace it and adapt it and add their own spin, which is why we have, distinct periods in art and culture and history. There's why the Edwardians are different to the Victorians and the Georgians and everything else.
I think that a large part of that comes from the Romantic period, when artists were sort of freed from patrons and they were supposed to be following their own inspiration. And I think that there was actually, recently I read a study which was of the Royal Academy and the artists who qualified from the Royal Academy. And it was quite interesting that apparently a lot of people came from the mercantile class and sort of what we would call the middle class. There were relatively few craftsmen, because craftsmen went directly into the business. They didn't go to the Royal Academy. And there was a study, and they said that there was very few cases of artists actually dying in poverty. There was one famous case, well, famous at the time, I can't remember the name, of someone who did actually die in a garret of starvation, and it was known that he had died because he just didn't have enough patrons. He wasn't making enough money. But previously, you would have had to have been a member of a guild, And if you were not making any money, you would have to leave the guild and do something else. You'd have to go off and be a farmhand or something menial, but that very rarely happened, because you had to be quite high level, quite tough to finish your apprenticeship and to become a master. So yeah, the idea, the starving artist came with the death of the guilds, basically.
Yeah, just another thing.
Also, I would say, when you touched on that just before, the various sort of eras, how different styles come and go. By and large, they tend to be reactions to the previous style. So, once something has been done to death, the next generation of artists that comes in wants to desperately get away from that. And we see that not just in sort of illustrative art, but you also get that in music and whatever. I mean, punk was very much a sort of reaction to glam rock and whatever, and stuff that had been before. And you also, to a certain extent, you could say you could get that in politics, where what gets voted in eventually is the reaction to people having got sick of what they've just had.
But then you do get periods where you get where it can exponentially go to the end, kind of to the end vision of a certain style. So if you look, for example, at classical architecture, that goes all the way through to where you get Baroque eventually, which is the real exaggeration of the classical style, and becomes and you get all the redundancies that go with it. Or you can flip the side again from classical architecture with Palladianism to modernism. That's that's where the minimal architecture derives from.
Something like neoclassical was a reaction to the sort of flamboyancy of the Baroque. So one deliberately sort of turned. So one stayed within the classical, but one sort of harked back. One basically said, okay, look, this has gone too far. We've got entire churches drowning in plaster cupids now. So yeah.
Again, yeah, that's true, and you get the neo-Gothic then, which is the true reaction against kind of the classical period, the neoclassical, because in that sense. But I would say it splits off in different schools, and each school kind of takes their own from a different theory of philosophy within a greater idea. So I would say that's the same in art and in politics, especially, where like I said, with the minimalism from Palladianism, or the kind of the intricacies of a Baroque. They exaggerate it and that becomes the key foundation or concept behind the kind of idea that is taken forward by certain things. I think it's just the way people are, though, isn't it? If you think about an artist, then, or a viewer of a work, you'll take each person will look at a piece of art, and they'll take something that their own impression upon them from the image. So, for example, for me, I will take something and I go, I love the way kind of the sort of how the landscape is formed, and how the light reacts with it, and I take that and I'd probably go away and say, this is what I want to really zoom in on. And so what happens is, over time, people just keep taking little bits out and exaggerating the bits they like, which then create these ideas and these forms. And using art as an example there, and then you could say the same in architecture, and I'd say in political philosophy.
Would you care to BTFO wine on this, Alexander?
No, I go along with that. I think that's very sensible. You do find this. It's like it's a question of individuation, that you have a teenager goes through a stage of distinguishing himself from his parents by rebelling and by doing something completely the opposite. So this sort of generational approach to looking at different schools, it's very true. So you see very strong individuation where people are reacting against the established style, and they want to do something different. They also want to go further. Whereas in Eastern cultures, especially China, of course, you prove yourself by mimicking the master. And it's once you have mimicked the master and you have absorbed their style that you get the permission to become slightly more individuated, but only slightly more. And it's always seen as like a sort of you rest on that bedrock, but you only have a slight evolution from that.
You know,
I
in
would
that regard, what we would really need to do regarding China is whenever they're sort of hoping to achieve superpower status from mimicking us, we should just simply send them a letter saying, no, you're not there yet, not good enough.
What's interesting about China is, as a civilization historically, is that they haven't they get to a point where they get very content and they remain a lot slower progressionally because of that. As Alexander said, it's that art of mimicking rather than innovation that really gets you up in the hierarchy there. And you'll talk to some my Chinese friend, for example, would say the same thing. And I think they put that story where they didn't understand why the West took gunpowder, brought it back, and made guns out of it. And they were like, these are things for fireworks for kids to play with, throw up the air. And and so they didn't think to do that because they were already happy with a bow and arrow. They felt that worked just fine. They didn't need to do innovate further on that. And in the West, I think what we've done, I think since the Enlightenment, we kind of deified progress into the point where the way you get higher in the hierarchy, and kind of I guess the Anglophone will especially, is through innovation, is through being an innovative mind and showing how that can better those around you. And that's what's happening is now we're in a period where that's become very there's not much progress to be done by many now, and they're desperate to figure out something to do it. And this is where we're starting to get the bad ideas come through, because they want to show that they are contributing and innovating to society. And this is why we're getting so many poor ideas through now, because there's only so much innovation that can be done.
Well, Pharaoh touched on this at the weekend with the drive for greater and greater efficiency. The idea that we've become an incredibly efficient society and deified not just progress, but efficiency, and by kind of wit of going down the more computerized route as well, as much as we end up guiding computers to become more and more efficient, you know, the limitations of what computers can do ends up guiding us as well, you know.
Yes, and it's modeled on the data, and a lot of the discrimination that's involved is not being applied because it's simply going through an algorithm, and this makes something more efficient, but it also makes something less aesthetic. And his idea was that the way to defeat the technocracy and defeat the tyranny of technology is to become more aesthetic. And by the way, I think we should mention that there is a book of the event which is well worth people getting if they were unable to attend, because all of the texts of all of the speakers are in this book. So if people go to, I think, shieldingsevents.org or .co or whatever it is.
I will put a link to the website.
But anyway, so my talk is there, and Mark's talk is there, and so is Pharaoh's and other people. So it's I think it's about £50, or maybe it will be going down to £45. But anyway, I would recommend that if anyone's interested in this, this is this will be a low circulation book, so it'll be a collector's item.
Yes, and you're all about building the collections, especially of physical items. I think one of the things which was really which I was really captured by was there was a chap at the event with a camera that did physical Polaroids. Literally, he would take the photo and then hand you this Polaroid and say, you know, keep it in your pocket for a couple of minutes, and it'd come out with the image, and it was a physical thing, you know, a marker of what we've done. And we take, or especially people with smartphones today, you know, they take thousands of images that they just then never look at again, or, you know, serve a different purpose. And it's just lovely to have something which was appreciable on more than, you know, it was aesthetic in more than just like the thing itself. So I thoroughly recommend sort of picking something up, and if you are to get something, get a physical copy, because it sounds great. Yes. Anyway, would you agree with that? Like on the theming of that point, Britisher? Like, I don't know how aesthetic your surroundings are. I can only imagine at the Zulu shields which adorn your walls, of the many carved, period tables in your studies and so on.
You've forgotten the shrunken heads. Sorry, I wasn't quite with you there through much of that monologue because I'm busy trying to block an avalanche on Twitter.
Okay.
When it comes to sort of aesthetics or something like that being a defense, I would say yes. Sort of culture as such is the great defense. It is much, much too large and vast to be conquered by people with purple hair and rings through their noses.
But it's not just that. We talk about my entire talk at the weekend, which, as I say, will be up on the channel eventually once it's finished processing and been edited and so on. Was all about abstraction, and we end up abstracting. Ferro had a great point about how modernist furniture with its clean lines and everything, which is has a value in and of itself. But the reason that it came to dominate was because it was easy to mass produce. With the bringing in of the power saw, which I thought was quite a stark sort of reminder that people will take the path of least resistance, especially given that they need to survive, and making money is seen as a way to survive. And the more units you can produce, the better it is for you. So the higher chance you have of that.
Well, a similar thing could be said about modern art. That in just the same way as modern furniture is easier to produce, so too if you have to produce art for a great many more public buildings due to the sort of quickening of progress, then if you can produce very large canvases very quickly simply by flinging paint at them, that is much more efficient than actually having to paint.
Or you have large teams of assistants, which is Jeff Koons, who's best known for his sculptures. I mean, his sculptures, of course, are manufactured by specialist manufacturers who make that sort of thing already. That are just sort of not mass produced, but sort of manufactured items, not necessarily art. Of course, he commissions them, and what he gets back from them, he designates as art and sells under his own brand name. But also painters also employ teams of studio assistants. So that's but was ever thus. It was like so in ancient times, as I'm sure Owen could tell you, and also in Renaissance workshops as well.
Oh yes, I mean Bernini is supposed to have basically employed every single sculptor in Rome, but in the end, what he turned out was still a Bernini. But it's when basically the whole process is just subcontracted, which you get in quite a bit of stuff today, where everything is subcontracted, but the idea has been that of the artist.
Yes. So for example, the Mark Quinn, you might remember the statue of Alison Lapper, the ex-thalidomide child who was born without I think that maybe without 4 limbs, was it? I'm not sure. Or reduced limbs or whatever, but she that was a statue made in marble, and Mark Quinn didn't touch it at all. That was entirely made by craftsmen.
So the idea came from the artist, and thus it's art, and it is his art, even though zero contribution has been made to the sort of creative process.
Yes, and Henry Moore would actually make a maquette, and he would have students, he'd have assistants enlarge it. But in the case of the Mark Quinn, he doesn't actually do the maquette at all. He just takes photographs, hands the photographs or the scans in this case, in some cases, to the manufacturer, as it were, and they make it without any intervention from the artist.
And somehow this whole thing still gets bought. Yes.
Well, then you get into the business of commissioning of public sculptures and public funding, which is a sticky topic. I'm
just looking at hearing this, and I'm just going, we wonder why things appear to be a little more soulless.
Well, yeah,
in the current age,
it's the contracting of society itself. It's you see it though. Right now, sculpture is a pretty bad mess. Like the most kind of the biggest kind of public works in terms of like statuettes and stuff we get now are usually outside a football stadium. In the UK,
yes,
at least.
but they don't tend to be great
They're not
examples.
Good. No, this is my point. They're awful.
Like
the one of Michael Jackson
with
outside of Fulham.
Richter screens, don't you?
Yeah. Do you know there's a Michael Jackson statue outside of Fulham football stadium?
No, there was one. I think it's been removed.
There was, because
Al Fayed put it.
Al Fayed was a friend of, a friendly with Michael Jackson. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And he put it outside. He put it out of the stadium, but then it's been bought now, and I think it's been put into a museum for the worst sculptures or something like that.
There is
I think the prize for worst sculpture still would have to go to that bust of Ronaldo.
Oh, the one which looked like it melted.
Yeah,
I like the
there
ship
was
of the ball.
that hideous one that made him look like a cartoon character. Yes.
There it is. I've got it up for you.
Look at the eyes, man.
It's definitely Kerouac, isn't it?
Yeah.
The hair's looks like he's finally got a realistic one there, but it's just.
But what's happened?
Imagine.
What's happened there? See, they've got the shape of a human head and neck, and they've tried to engrave Ronaldo's face onto the front of it, and they've completely botched it. Oh my god!
Imagine seeing that in your dreams tonight.
It's coming.
Or imagine you get a knock on the door and you're expecting a pizza, and that's the face of the pizza delivery guy.
And yeah, you got the art restoration jobs. Like, was it the one at the Church of Spain? They pretended that she said she could restore it, and she failed massively.
Miserably.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a shame though. We have a massive glut of like real craftsmen right now. It's you'd think in a world as connected as we are now, though, you could find someone out of the 7 or 8 billion of us, but many of the great crafts are very much on their knees. I think it's a matter, though, like you said earlier, of the efficiency kind of that we've become so efficient at being able to automate the kind of replication of things that nobody needs to necessarily be great at replicating or crafting things as such anymore.
Well, I mean, that was also part of the reason why one sort of drifted into Impressionism, wasn't it? That the photo cameras had come along. So the idea of trying to create a sort of photographic representation of a person seemed to kind of lose those two are fantastic. But it lost some of its cachet. So instead one tried more to go for a feel of something rather than one was still in the area of great art, but one clearly was kind of trying to escape the grip of technology, making one redundant, if you know what I mean.
There is, I mean, aside from the fact that this looks just like something by Aardman, very Wallace and Gromit, sort of mid stop motion, but no, there is still like a core of like hyper realistic art, but even I think like because there's a lot of very very fine art tools now, especially with the wide array of colors and technology, but they again miss like I don't think that the people who were getting their portraits done, etc., were going for hyper realism. I feel like they were going for like in some sense the best possible sense, and part of that is a survival instinct. You don't draw your patron in a very unflattering way, right? But
curiously enough, Goya was famous for making these portraits of the Spanish royal family that were brutally realistic, and he was continually employed and these were very quite cruel, because the Bourbon, I think the Bourbons by that stage were quite inbred.
It's the Habsburgs, isn't it?
The Habsburg chin,
Habsburgs,
wasn't it?
yes, it was the Habsburgs.
Habsburg chin and the lower lip, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, the Habsburg. Who was it specifically? It was King. It's in the back of my mind. But he had that insane chin and like very stringy head. Yeah.
And he couldn't actually he had difficulty eating, that he was so deformed, and also he had problems, reproductive problems as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the Habsburgs did in general, didn't they? Believe it or not, though, the Habsburgs still exist. They still own are one of the largest personal wealths in Austria, obviously. It's interesting actually to see that they still actually hold titles, I believe, as well. Because interesting about, even though these are republics now, many of them, especially like in France, many of the dukes and stuff have kept their titles. Oddly, it's one of these things.
Well, yeah, there's still quite a lot of sort of German aristocratic families, even though they've sort of been partly dispossessed, but they're still around. Yeah,
such as our own.
Oh well, yes, there's that.
I am just loving going through some of these artworks.
I love that face. It's like, what's going on? What? That looks like a real meme image, I gotta be honest.
Like everyone else, stand up straight with your shoulders back. This guy.
What shoulders?
Yeah. What neck?
It's just like, say what? That's the face, isn't it?
Yeah, but whoever painted that was very keen on textiles, wasn't it? The detail in the actual clothing, in the textile, was remarkable. But the face, well, yeah, that's a different matter.
Albert II of Germany.
Well, yes, it's clearly a one of the things which scares me about art. One of the things that I don't do about it is the relative permanence. So whilst you can kind of hide or disguise mistakes and that sort of thing, I'd be terrified of basically trying to create my masterwork and then putting a line wrong. There's something to be said for like drawing something like this, where I can't really fault it. I'm sure that the artist could pull out a dozen tiny mistakes, but like it's just an insane level of quality and work.
The biggest risk you face is when you're carving, and of course if you hit a floor. That's one of the famous reasons why Michelangelo, for example, was very careful about the blocks of stone that he would choose, like all really expert carvers, because if you got a stone with a flaw in it, then you could put hours and you could put months into a statue and it would just simply come apart. It would crack in half when you hit it in the wrong way. And that's something that you can tell by you take a hammer and you give it a rap, and if it rings like a bell, then it's good. If you get a sort of dull clunk, then it's got a flaw in it and you don't choose it.
It's like when you're, again, like in a building, if you're a craftsman of a floor or a door, if you do it incorrectly, well, as soon as that door swells, the whole thing the frame will break, or the floor. What can happen is quite often, if you haven't dried the wood properly, you can lay the floor down with perfect spacing between each board, and then suddenly the boards will shrink, and you'll have massive spaces and gaps in your flooring. So it's actually. Yeah, there's an intricacy to it and an understanding of preparation, and there's caution you have to approach each and every action with.
I read recently there was a biography, a memoir of an art dealer called Alex Wengraf, and they were slightly casual about the way they handled pictures sometimes. And he had a picture on several planks of wood, which was quite common, and they bow, which is also unavoidable. Yes, that's the guy. And he had this sort of bowing painting, so he hammered it into the frame. So he sort of nailed it into the frame, and then he heard, and then late that night he heard a bang, and he went downstairs, and the plank had bent itself back into its natural form and it had exploded the frame.
Oh no!
Yes, but the picture was undamaged. The frame was destroyed.
Oh, good grief.
Positive.
Yes.
But see, working in timbers can be quite difficult because the timbers swell. They and then when it's hot, they reduce because they hold water like anything. And so like it's a big issue to deal with when you're back in historically when they were building houses. Often houses would just fall down because the framing on the timbers would just contract, and suddenly next thing you know it, nothing fits properly because it's all it's all pegged and stuff, and it just all collapses down.
Whereas now houses have planned obsolescences built into them, so they won't even last 150 years.
They'll last only 30 if you're lucky.
Well, yes, quite a few things have obsolescence planned into them, don't they, Owain? Such as light bulbs.
Yes. We had this argument.
I know. I have to check. I heard a story about architecture, which I wanted to check with you, and that is that some architects, especially in central London, were being told to build unremarkable buildings. I mean, obviously you have things like the Shard and stuff, where obviously they're landmark building, they're slightly different. But people are so terrified of getting lumbered with the Lloyds of London, where you have a listed building. So the architects are told to build something undistinguished because otherwise you're going to be tied to maintaining it and restoring it and so forth, and you can't simply demolish it.
Yeah, for cities now, a big issue is the fact that a lot of planners and developers hate listed buildings. They hate them, and they would happily knock down a St Paul's Cathedral if it meant they could get another supermarket there, or another soulless flat there. And so what a lot of developers do is the same thing with kind of in everywhere really, because to keep land value down, so it means they could construct it again. It's a bit different for housing, but I guess we'll keep it to the city here. They want something unremarkable, which means that they could in the future it could be replaced easily, and also for a planner, planners also won't approve something that's too unique per se, and has too much of a vision in it, because they don't want that hassle of having it become liked.
Yes.
And
or loathed.
Or loathed, yeah. So they want something benign, banal, you know. And so if you think about it, because a big issue as well is that all the Georgian terraces and stuff like that. Now,
I was going to say, just like the idea that people mistake understated for banal, so what ends up happening is they go, we want something which isn't necessarily isn't groundbreaking, isn't going to draw in a massive crowd, isn't going to cost us loads to maintain, that we can't do anything with, that can't ever be replaced, which is a shame, I think. But also, like the developers then interpret this and then go, right, concrete square balconies. And they don't think about like understated ways to make polite design, for instance.
And also there's a cookie cutter approach to architecture now, where a lot of times you'll find the same building plan plopped everywhere, maybe some material changed, judging on the planning regulation of the area. For example, in London, certain streets you have to have sash windows. And so you have to try and create a building that will accommodate a sash window, or you can try and get around it. So yeah, that's the thing. And I was going to say the kind of London terrace sort of those Georgian terraces, they hate those with an absolute passion, because there's entire swathes of London they can't do anything with, and because they're all listed, every one of them is listed, and this is why I think in the 60s and 50s they just knocked down as much of historic Britain as they could. So for example, in my town, they knocked down an entire quarter of the town, which was full of Georgian terraces, to build a bypass, to build a dual carriageway. The same thing happened on an immense scale in New York and London, I believe. So they hate it now though, because they have to try and plan within these sort of these constraints that weren't designed necessarily for cars, but and for the populations that we have now in city centres. But things are changing, obviously, now. I think, honestly, a positive thing I could say is that I think the internet may actually save a great number of buildings from being demolished, because it means that it can decentralize offices. It means you don't need these massive spaces anymore. And also, people don't need to travel as much. So, it's a bit of a savior in that respect. So we'll see. That's moving on from your point there. So
I mean, on the other hand, it may be a source of more damage. So,
but
if you have the people who
silver linings.
leave the cities in order to, because they can work from home, who then need like proper grids set up so that they can power those homes, and they get to a period building and they go, this is going to meet my urbanite needs, and then it gentrifies the entire area, drives prices through the roof anyway.
So that's a massive problem in the countryside, where urbanites move out to the countryside or usually retire or something like that, and they go to a country home and go, oh, this is amazing, and there's a very nice country village and all this, and they go there wanting to be a part of the life. They go there, they don't get involved at all with the life. They bitch about everyone around them. They don't understand how to communicate with a neighbor properly or work with a neighbor. And also they see their house and they realize after 2 weeks of living there, oh, I need another bedroom there. I need a bathroom. I need another bathroom. Oh, me and my wife no longer sleep in the same room, so we have to sleep in 2 separate bedrooms, and so on. And what if Steve and Eileen want to come over from Chelsea, and they need their own little apartment, and so they build these kind of huge extensions. These extensions, which some I've designed, which are again quite plain because they're economic. They're done with like maybe you'll have a 325 millimeter wall of two layers of block work with your insulation and stuff like that, and that just kind of sits on the edge of the side of this kind of historic farmhouse. And you kind of got that's there then, it's, and so you start getting these basically middle class palaces out in the middle of nowhere off of these old farmhouses.
Yeah, this was something that Edward Slingsby was talking about in his talk. So anyone who gets the book, I'm not shilling for the book, I don't get any money from the book, but if anyone gets the book of the event, they can see in his talk where he talks about people getting these sort of vernacular buildings and then building on modern extensions, and the ethos being that the extension must be modern to distinguish it from the old part. And of course, this creates a weird sort of hybrid. Yeah,
it's a big thing right now. It's conservation architecture, some would call it. So there's a good example of such things, not on a dwelling, but it's on a museum in Bath. I believe.
Holborn.
The Holborn Museum extension.
Yes, I've been there. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's one example in the UK. You have this kind of, and often it's copper, bronze.
Dulwich Picture Gallery as well.
Yes, but there are positive ones as well, though. If you look at the new tower in Westminster Abbey, that's a very nice kind of modern interpretation of neo-Gothic.
Yeah, so I think that's a Georgian building, is it?
It's a Georgian building. So the problem here is with the Georgian building, again, modern architects hate Georgian buildings. Why? Because they're designed so acutely. The proportions are so acutely designed that you can't do anything with it, because everything is it's a singular form. You shouldn't be changing it at all when it comes to Georgian buildings, because that's how classical works. But so they add these to the side, and when I saw it, I didn't like it. My mate, many of my colleagues and peers in the architecture school loved it. I personally didn't like it. I'd rather that they've just gone underground.
Good God. I'm just looking at this thing. Holborn Museum.
Yes, that's in Bath, centre of Bath,
that
historic Bath.
Absolutely ghastly.
It's it's what Edward Slingsby was calling the glass box phenomena.
Yeah.
This isn't just what happened is this extension would be ghastly in any other context. It would be ghastly because it is ghastly. But given what it's attached to, this should just be dynamited. I'm sorry. There's just no way. This is a crime against heritage. I'm sorry.
So what's the worst thing about it? Is that it's positioned behind it, I guess. But this is down Great Pulteney Street in Bath, which is the Great Avenue of Bath in a way. It's
right at the end. Yeah, at the opposite end to the train station. Yeah.
Yeah. So and whilst it doesn't spoil the proportions from the front, as soon as you leave Pulteney Street onto the kind of onto the Sydney Gardens area, the proportions completely ruined by the building on the facades.
It looks like someone's put a Starbucks too close to it.
Well, it's a cafe. Believe it or not, that's where
it is the cafe. Actually, yes, it is the cafe. The ground floor is the cafe. Yes.
Well, I mean, if you wanted a definition of the word incongruous, that's it, surely.
We'll make a reactionary of you yet, Britisher. You're getting there.
It is bulbous. It is the wrong shape. It is the wrong color. It is the wrong materials, and it is in the wrong place because it's too close to the building. Aside from anything else, even if they have built it in there, the fact that it's just bizarre, sort of like snugly hiding. It's like a monster out of some kind of King Kong film, like hiding behind a building. That's what I see when I see this, and I say that as someone who kind of like I can see some artistic merit in it, but like at the same time, I look at it and I go, it's very generic, and I don't want it here. It is not setting here.
Dare I say it's in bad taste?
Yes,
you may say yes.
But there are some examples, right, of decent kind of extension work going on. Like in the private chart, so I put in the new Westminster Abbey Tower. So this was created to add essentially disabled access to the upper floors of Westminster Abbey. But what the architect's done there is he's taken kind of modern materials and create this sort of neo-Gothic tower that kind of sits nicely within one of the crevices of
curves.
Well, yeah, he's got the curved lines on it, but that's just decoration of the window. I can get around that, but
I'm not complaining about the curves. It's like,
all right, yeah,
curves, and like something which was pointed out. The use of computer-aided design. It's much easier to build a rectangle than to do anything. So, I mean, we should count ourselves lucky even put curves on it.
But I think it's very good modern interpretation of kind of the neo-Gothic style there with the kind of it's mainly timber internally.
It helps that it's the right color scheme aside from anything else. Like they've clearly made an effort to try and match it to its surroundings, which is not something which could be said for, say, the Great Green Blob here.
Honestly, though, with that as well, it's like one of these small things that a lot of buildings don't have anymore is the leading in the windows. It changes it completely. It improves it dramatically. Because you look at new houses, I think houses are missing this terribly. Is the style of windows they're putting in houses now? Like if you go through them, it's just like it's the same PVC window everywhere. Nothing. It doesn't have like any leading. There's nothing. Like there used to be a great historic craft of window making.
The white rectangle that is very much panel work. Yes.
The English invented the sash window to get away from casement windows, and we're back at casement windows, just plastic ones.
I can sense the frustration in your voice, Owain.
Well, as I say, when it comes to this tower at Westminster Abbey, as you say, it's in keeping. It attempts to be in keeping. Another example you might bite my head off if I mentioned this because you might hate it. I quite like it. The courtyard of the British Museum.
Oh.
Where the glass roof has been put on.
Yeah.
In itself, I think it's quite good, but I think it's in the wrong place.
Works.
Okay. Yeah.
We have controversy, ladies and gentlemen.
There is. Look, okay, again, the color of it's correct because it's a kind of that kind of oxidized copper color, isn't it? Like it suits the aquamarine sort of color, the aqua green. What would you call it? And that works. And I guess obviously this is a museum. It needs more floor space. And that works in a way because it still feels outside when you're there.
If I remember rightly, this was pretty much an abandoned yard with weeds in it.
Yeah.
And in fact, they actually had to build one of the facades of the actual museum building. So they basically replicated the facade.
Yes, one of the facades was completely new. Yeah.
Right.
So that they tried to keep the whole thing in keeping, and it was a bit of a it was a piece of sort of engineering trickery as to how they coped with putting the roof on it. So the roof is basically kept. It's got a sort of steel frame all the way around, so that contains the arch, and then the frame rests just vertically on the walls, because otherwise you would have had to buttress the inside of the walls in the building to be able to contain the arch. But no, that's sort of one of the few where I feel that sort of the marriage of something that is classical and modern has worked without it just basically screaming at you. So it's not that by sort of in principle I'm against it, but it has to work and it has to fit. And when it's a matter of just putting glass and yellow-green cubes on the back of Jordan buildings, that's when I just, no, I'm sorry, I'm not having it.
Mm-hmm. Oh. Bad extensions. That's hair extensions.
It's something completely different.
If you're wondering why we're looking at hair extensions.
We've got... I mean, this is just going to be, you know, people's conservatories, isn't it? Like...
Well, see, architects right now have like there's more of an obsession with adhering to regulation than there is to actual design, and it's partially for a few things. Like, again, many clients don't want big designs. They want something economical and something that can be done now. There's a high time preference for architecture right now. So you want a quick turnover. That's number one goal, and everything. Well, that kind of so. There's a complete monetary drive to it. There's a complete economic drive to when they actually build housing estates, and these housing estates have got to be able to be mass manufactured and built with the parts that they have available to them already. And this is that's what's creating all these awful housing estates we are seeing everywhere. And
one of the biggest things with the housing estates as well is all the money is in residential units. So nobody wants to build a retail unit that they're only going to rent at less of a profit per square foot than a residential unit.
Also,
and of course, you end up with these enormous sprawling kind of towns, effectively cut off from everywhere else, unable to buy, who have to drive out to like this to where the high street previously was, instead of building a proper set of retail units.
Yeah, and any bits of green is just there to basically stop rainwater runoff. They're just soakaways, and it's like it's awful. And the parks then are just there because regulation says there has to be one after a certain number of houses. And then you've got affordable housing contribution, which again has become a big issue for developers and stuff like that. So they'll avoid doing certain things to avoid affordable housing contribution. They'll try and work their ways around it. And you won't have any. There won't be any like pubs in there. You might get a primary school if you're lucky. So it's these things are just these estates are just awful, and like in them. They put boilers in them that they break down after a year because they're designed to basically be a constant source of money for the manufacturer. So that's why they're terrible. Has anyone noticed how boilers are worse now?
Yes, so if you discussed the boiler situation where they were talking about rushing through this proposal to get in the eco boilers, getting rid of the gas boilers.
Well, so this is why they want to get rid of again a lot of eco stuff. I'm not going to talk about the actual environment here. I'm just talking about kind of the incentives behind the eco developments. Is that it's a way of easily getting money. So what they want to do is get rid of in many homes, in many places, they want to get rid of the hearth. They want to get rid of the fireplaces, because that's a source of free heating where the government can't tax you from it. And it's the same thing what's going to happen with cookers when everything goes electric. So before long, I think they're banning the sale of gas cookers at some point.
I think they're banning Argus first, surely.
Yeah, and so they're going to move. Everything's going to be eventually electric cookers, everything, but then commercial units, I believe. So it's that's those are going to probably be very low quality. They're going to have high turnovers, so that constant streams of money. It's this idea of switching everything to electric as well it's just easier to tax, easier for the government for things to. There are other incentives behind it than just the environment, ladies and gentlemen. That's what I'm trying to say, which are a lot more nefarious.
Yes. What I've put up on screen now is an example of sort of attempts, I suppose, to sort of marry the local style with like as modern as we can tolerate. This is a Tesco from. That was a big sigh. This is a Tesco. This is a Tesco from the town where I grew up, of all places. And they demolished the entire road network and a school to put it in. And they did relocate the school. But you'll notice on the sides of the buildings, like you've got these sort of brown panels here, which have the town crest and the county crest and stuff like that. And it was supposed to be made out of brick because they were told that they weren't allowed to build it out of, just sort of white PVC and concrete and corrugated iron. And it's got a clock tower on it, and they didn't have to do that. And the car park itself has got this chap on it, a bronze of a man hauling ropes, which constitute the fencing around the car park. So, sort of in a white pilling sense, there is some kind of, I suppose, not fire, but like there's an intent in local populations to not see their sort of local areas decimated by gargantuan, out of place public money sculpture and nonsense, as it were.
Well, as Owen will,
the fact that we were a rope making town once.
Yes, as Owen will tell you, each large architectural project has money set aside for sculpture.
Yes, there has to be. There has to be, and also you have community contributions as well. So, yeah, this is why you get so these odd sculptures that happen out of nowhere for some reason, and like it's sometimes actually right now you get the odd statue which has it's of something that has only got a very tentative actual connection to the location. Or like, it's a sculpture of a goose. They used to drive geese through here once. Here we are, because it's never of a famous, it's never of an actual person anymore, or because they could have bad history.
More
you see those in Cardiff as well, because I go to Cardiff quite a lot, and you get like the miner and you get the mother with the child, and I like the sentiment, but I don't like the actual art.
In Cardiff is a big problem. Like Cardiff Bay, I'm sure you've been there many times, Alex. If you go there, it's rather tired looking now, most of it. But they have many of those random sculptures that make very little sense being there. But then the fact that it used to be a working dock.
Well, would it be more? Is it more distasteful because whilst it's in keeping with what you might call the theming of the area or the history of it, it's the fact that it is quintessentially unmemorable.
Mm-hmm.
It is. I mean, we in Britain have a very rich history of statues and sculptures which serve as a physical manifestation of history. I mean, we are called the outdoor museum by people on the continent because we have so many of these sort of historical plaques and statues and sort of markers of history, and everyone, there's always an old codger in the area who knows exactly everything to do with this person, and is very proud to show it off to anyone who comes by, no matter how minor the figure. And I think that bronze rope hauling man in my local town is a bit of a. It's nice to have him there because it's a callback, but at the same time, it falls into the same realm almost as like corporate art, in that like it represents everybody, but it represents nobody because of that.
It has pitch quality.
Its chief quality is that it's inoffensive.
Yes. No, that'd be a good way of describing it, especially a lot of public works now, that the public works has to be very inclusive. That means it must have nothing discernible about it that could be taken by someone, and must have no qualities whatsoever of a person other than it looks like a person.
It looks like a person, but there's nothing going on underneath. Are you sure that we're not creating mass sculptures of the NPC meme?
We are.
Wow.
Just NPCs.
You do mention that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like that bronze man there, you could literally call a non-playable character.
I mean, it's not as if the entire art is completely dead. It does still exist. It's just that, yes, when it comes to some sort of commissions outside football, I mean, this is very much the example you gave us there. It's very much a sort of outside football ground statue, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's this kind of inoffensive every person as far as the face is concerned. I mean, don't tell me these sculptures outside football grounds look anything like the footballer they're supposed to represent. But to take one, are you familiar with the what are they called? The Horses of Helios.
I am.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, I think that was put up early 1990s. So, okay, it's 30 years, but nonetheless, in sort of the greater scheme of things, there you're looking at something that is, impressive. And I think this is what we kind of expect art to do with, you know what I mean? That is something going on other than just mediocrity.
Well, in the UK, I think some of the nicest actual kind of dedicated statues lately have been like of comedians, etc. Isn't it the one of is it Morecambe? Is it Morecambe Wise?
It'd be Morecambe, yeah.
On the promenade where he sat on a chair. Is it that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's there's a few, there's like some of them, like they're like decent statues that but because right now obviously we venerate. Oh God, we venerate our.
What was it? That one?
I think it's
was
that.
Was that the statue being put up, or has it been hit by a car?
Well,
that looks as though he's hit by a car. Yeah.
Yeah.
Man
vandalized
on suspicion of attempted theft.
Oh,
somebody tried to nab him.
Where's he going to try and sell it to, though? Who outside the UK?
I don't think
he didn't want the statue. He just wanted the boot.
He's literally just attempting to cut through one of the legs of the statue. People have called the police, and then they've had to do it. Good grief!
Well, he was famously associated with the slave trade, so he had to go.
I'd forgotten that he had died on stage as well, Morecambe.
No, he didn't. No, you're thinking of
you're thinking of
Tommy Cooper.
Tom Cooper. The
Morecambe, born John Eric Bartholomew in Morecambe in 1926, used his hometown for his stage surname. He died on the 28th of May 1984 after collapsing on stage with a heart attack.
Yeah, that happens a lot to comedians.
That's the way to go.
And maybe Dustin G as well, didn't he? He died of a heart attack, just as Les Dennis and Dustin G were becoming famous. He died. Yeah.
Did they realise they weren't actually funny and the imposter syndrome killed them? No, that's a very bad taste joke. Goodness me.
I think there's a Tommy Cooper statue as well, isn't there?
Probably. I mean, there's a.
I think it's very much the way Ken Dodd would have wanted to go, to basically die on stage. I mean, given how old the old culture got, but they had to retire him eventually at the end. But I mean, given that he easily did 3-hour sets and sometimes beyond that, Ken Dodd would have sort of been the ultimate guy to go on stage.
Yeah, so so this is the Amy Winehouse one, which is in is that in Portobello?
It's
Camden
in
Town.
Camden Town, yeah.
Camden Town, yes, which was where she lived. Yes.
It's, there's someone who comes and lays a flower at her feet every year on the anniversary of her death. It's quite sweet, and it's a lot smaller in person than you think it's going to be. I must say, these people evidently are dwarves standing next to her to be shorter than her.
I believe that's her parents, isn't it?
I mean,
yes.
I don't know.
I can't say I'm overly impressed at this statue.
I know
it
caused a bit of a stir when it was put up because the placement of it, and obviously because she was a pop star. And do we really put up statues to pop stars? That was the general rhetoric, but it seems to now become a bit of a favourite of the area. So
I think you can put up statues to pop stars if they, how should we say, if they achieve a certain degree of
fame.
To be honest, I'm not sure Amy Winehouse would be in that category.
Is that one of the Beatles?
I know this sounds a harsh thing to say, but I don't mean this cruelly. I just mean I don't think she's not the Beatles, if you know what I mean.
No.
But at the same time, I look at the statue and it just I think it's a fairly poor attempt, to be honest.
So there is one of the Beatles in Liverpool, isn't there?
Several.
Yeah.
I think
the Beatles, that is something, that's a sort of phenomenon, a global thing, and they were seen as the first of something and whatever. And you can see how that is sort of commemorated in a statue. And I'm not necessarily sure what exactly you are commemorating in a statue with Amy Winehouse.
Well, obviously the Beatles are here and were erected in order to, as you see, promote mask wearing in the youth of today.
They anticipated the biosecurity state. Yes, that's what they're most known for.
That's what Beatles stands for, isn't it? The biosecurity enterprise and technology. I don't know how I'll go with this. I got pretty far, but yes, I don't think Amy. I think I agree with you, Bridger, that Amy Winehouse doesn't have exactly the cultural
would we be
impact.
surprised if someone puts up a statue to the Rolling Stones?
R.I.P. Charlie Watts.
R.I.P.
Charlie Watts.
Charlie Watts. But when their time comes and perhaps they're all gone or whatever, would we really be surprised if there is a statue somewhere to the Rolling Stones, just given the sheer monstrosity of their success, if you know what I mean, given how they are cultural icons? In the same thing, I mean, I guess will be a statue or two to Freddie Mercury, won't there?
I think there is.
There was one already in Montreux in Switzerland where he lived, overlooking the lake.
There you go. And so things like that, I could imagine Elton John. More controversially these days, I would expect Eric Clapton more than likely to get the same treatment. But again, these are when it comes.
Oasis will get one in Manchester, no doubt.
Again, I wouldn't see them in quite the same dimension. As I think pop music, if anything, in recent decades has decreased in its significance.
It's corporatized, isn't it now?
But I think, when you look at sort of those one or two generations of musicians that were just absolutely gargantuan in scale, I could well imagine that they will get statues.
Right. I think Tom Jones has many statues in Wales. Definitely has one in Pontypridd, I think.
What about Richard Burton?
Richard Burton does have one in Port Talbot.
Looking very somber, clinging onto a cigarette, no doubt.
Well, that's how everyone looks in Port Talbot.
When searching for a Tom Jones statue, this is the first thing that comes up. I'm afraid. It also doesn't look like they've made an actual statue of him. It's like they've made a cross section of a statue.
It will happen, I have no doubt. If it hasn't already happened. Oh my god.
Please tell me that's a cake or something rather than an actual statue.
No, it's obviously an amateur piece.
It's a plaster cast, I believe.
Yes. It's a pottery piece, and someone.
Yeah.
Peter here is obsessed with it.
I mean, if you really want to hear Tom Jones at his absolute height, on YouTube, you can sort of get him singing duets with people like Little Richard and what's he called, the rock and roll pianist,
Carlton from Fresh Prince, because he was on it. Tom Jones, he was a massive Tom Jones fan. Apparently, and they brought him on for a show, and it was one of the biggest appearances of a Welshman on television, apparently.
But no, I mean, he was a superstar. I think he basically didn't do himself any favors by then basically setting up a residence in Las Vegas and just singing my Delilah 3 times a day.
Well, that's what Dean Martin did. So, like Tom Jones, I like Tom Jones has kind of modeled himself quite a bit off Dean Martin. I would say.
Yes, but
and Shirley Bassey.
If you're singing duets with Ella Fitzgerald, and if you achieve that
and you're
sort of
personal friends
thing,
with Elvis,
then just basically doing Vegas, not creating any new songs, and having middle-aged women throw their knickers at you is perhaps not the ideal way to go.
One of the funniest stories I think was about when he met Elvis first time round. Elvis was convinced he was black. Absolutely convinced of it, and he didn't. When he was introduced to Elvis was introduced to him. He was like, no, this can't be the guy. That like a bass like that's a black guy's voice, and he thought because Jones as well, in America, obviously it's not necessarily associated with more as a black name. So his first impression was that he would be black, and he was absolutely stunned by it.
So he expected James Earl Jones and not Tom Jones.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, man. So anyway, sorry about that. I have to get, I have a certain kind of quota of Welsh stuff I got to put into these episodes when I'm on.
Well, Chuck Berry had the opposite problem, didn't he? That he got invited to places because they thought he was white, and then he would turn up and they would go, "Oh, I'm sorry, we've got a problem. You can't come on stage."
The early rock and roll had that issue, didn't it?
Well, I mean, Chuck Berry sort of blended rock with country music. And therefore, in quite a lot of places in America, one just assumed he was white. So it came as quite a surprise when Chuck Berry turned up.
The evergreen, Johnny B.
Carl Perkins, wasn't it? The piano player.
No, I'm thinking. I'm trying.
Jerry Lee Lewis. Sorry, Jerry Lee Lewis.
Yes, Jerry Lee Lewis is the. There is a fantastic clip of the two of them. Okay, there is some corny, fake conversation for the benefit of the audience, but Jerry Lee Lewis and Tom Jones, there is a fantastic piece of them doing various numbers together. And that's when you get an idea of just how talented those two men were.
It's mad how long he's been around, Tom Jones. Like, in the neck. Still going, like a guy who sung with both.
He famously fainted at the end of Thunderball, didn't he?
Yes.
That last note at Thunderball, he just basically held it until he passed out. And the guy, oh God, I'm showing my age. I'm terrible. I just forget names. I'm like a colander these days. The guy that wrote all the Bond music, he felt terribly, terribly guilty at what he had done to Tom Jones and putting him through this. And then later, he actually saw Tom Jones perform it in Las Vegas, and apparently he did it 3 times a day. And he just, obviously him being who he was, he could go backstage and meet Tom Jones after the show, and he went, "Well, I mean, last time I saw you doing this, you passed out. How the hell?" And Tom Jones just looked at him and went, "You didn't notice?" We've lowered it by an octave.
That's very, very good.
Oh,
on
no.
that note, gentlemen, which is rather positive and so on, I am afraid I'm going to bring the stream to an end. However, it's been a great joy to have all three of you on. Actually, it's gone in different directions that I didn't expect, and all of the art and sculpture and musical talk has been a delight. So I'd like to thank very much my guests for coming on today, starting with, of course, our sort of top biller being Alexander Adams. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much for asking me on. It was a great pleasure to speak with you, and thank you to the people in the chat who were saying complimentary things about my and Mark's talks as well.
Thank you to Owine for jumping in after being indignant that we were having a talk on architecture without him.
Thank you very much for bringing me on, Anna. So it was a great pleasure as well speaking with you, Alexander, as well.
Thank you. Diolch. Nosta.
Diolch yn fawr.
And thank you to the Britisher for suffering through many terrible art restorations with all of us as well.
Well, and I would just like to add once more, there was no such thing as an ancient Brittonic empire built on copper.
I'm literally now just gonna have to prove this just to get at you. Yeah.
Do it. Get out there and do it, Owine. You won't be able to convince us otherwise.
I'll need to go to the Cornish coast with diving gear.
We'll be getting sort of footage taken by people in social media of some chap in Wales digging in the mud in the pouring rain, muttering to himself, "I will find it. I will find it. I will find it."
Look, you'll see though, Versha. You'll see. They all fought everyone. Like, all the smartest in society are always called crazy ones.
Yes, I know they thought, that Troy wasn't real until it was found. But yes, I think you've more than likely got your work cut out trying to.
I think I found the corner of the pub where the old codgers hang out and argue.
Yes, well, Owine certainly fits that description.
I think I definitely qualify as old codger.
24.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you ever so much for joining us today. Thank you to everyone in the chat who contributed and enjoyed the stream. And we will see you all again next week. Take care, everyone. Good night.
Toodle pip.
Nosta.
Nosta.